family. I hope you all are safe. Thank you for staying connected with us. I'm Sharon Strange Lewis, Director of Alumni Relations for our beloved Howard University. Thank you for joining this edition of Howard Forward Thinking, a Bison Roundtable. Today's topic is mental health. We have assembled an elite panel of psychologists from Howard's Counseling Center to tackle this topic. Today's roundtable will be moderated by Dr. Kelechi Floyd. The floor is all yours, Dr. Floyd. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sharon. Welcome, Bison family. We are so glad to be a part of this discussion and this much needed topic of mental health, especially amidst everything that's happening between the viral pandemic, as well as the social injustices happening all across our globe. At this time, I want to take the time to introduce this esteemed panel. We are representatives from the Howard University Counseling Service, where we provide mental health services for our students, undergraduate, graduate, and professional students. First, I want to introduce our director, Mr. Michael Barnes, if he could say hello at this time.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome.
Thank you. At this time, I want to introduce Dr. Jonathan Good, if he can also say hello.
Good morning, everyone.
And last but not least, Dr. Jessica Desalu, if she can also say hello.
Good afternoon, everyone.
So welcome. I think it's really helpful for us to talk about or to start the discussion around what is mental health. When you think about this notion of mental health, what do you view mental health as? And why do we think that people have such a tough time grasping the importance of taking care of their mental health? And so panelists, it's time you all have the opportunity, including myself, to speak. We can have multiple people answer or just one person. So what do you think? What is mental health? I think I'll start first. And so mental health for me is that additional layer of yourself that needs to be taken care of. It is your emotional well-being. And so we have physical health, and people usually address that through exercise or eating right. We have spiritual health, which people usually exercise through religious activity or some type of meditation, some type of connection to the earth or grounding. And then we have mental health, which is the emotional side. And people don't always take the time to address that because it's difficult, right? It's not something that you see, but it's something that impacts every part and every fiber of us. And so mental health is very much a part of who we are. And sometimes it's tough because depending on how we were reared, the conversations around mental health weren't had. And so we don't always know how to take care of our mental health. And so we had to talk about, how do you take care of your mental health? Panel, what would you say? What's some ways that we can take care of our mental health?
So let me follow you by saying that two words come to mind immediately when I think of mental health, and I think about flexibility and adaptability. We as human beings, as we progress through life, will face a lot of life circumstances that will be challenging. Many will be rewarding, but those that are challenging are certainly poignant. Yeah. And you have to be flexible, and you have to think about adapting to some of those circumstances. By adapting, I'm not talking about giving in, but letting go of some of our beliefs and things that we hold too strongly to. Otherwise, that puts us in a tug of war between what we believe and what is actuality. And so there is flexibility and adaptability and room in there in between for us to get on and move on to the next stage. So flexibility and adaptability come to mind.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any thoughts about ways that we can improve our mental health or mental wellness, ways that we can address it? What are some of the first steps would you suggest?
I think when I think about mental health, I think about it in a prevention and intervention standpoint. And I think sometimes only the intervention standpoint gets highlighted, right? Like when we're struggling, then we start thinking a lot more about our mental health. But there are things that we can do even before struggling. There are things that we can do to maintain our mental well-being. And so I think it's important to acknowledge both of those pieces as we have this conversation on mental health and mental wellness.
That's good, Dr. Deslou. That's good, Dr. Barnes. Any thoughts?
And to echo what you were saying, to speak further about that, Dr. Deslou, is like, traditionally we lived in a society where we really adhered to a medical model, and we really didn't think about the importance of our mental health or our emotional well-being. Just as much as you would want to take care of diabetes, high blood pressure, a broken foot, your mental health is just as important, as they're all interconnected. Dr. Floyd mentioned how we're all connected in terms of our mind, body, and spirit. And if you think about it, our mind is really closely linked to our body, and they are coinciding. Sometimes one thing leads to another. So that's why it's really important to tap into your mental health, as it is also affecting your physical health, and your physical health also affects your mental health, and your mind, body, and spirit. If we can all see them as a co-occurring function, that's very important for us to realize the importance of our mental health. It affects us as a whole being.
Yeah. And I think that's important. I think it's important to acknowledge, to your point, Dr. Good, the interconnectedness between the mind, body, and spirit. And how when one needs a little bit more support, it's important for us to find ways to support it. So what are some ways that we can help our mental health? What are some ways that we can get to a better mental space? And these can be everyday ways that we can do it. These could be more long-term. What would you suggest? If someone said, I want to improve my mental wellness, what would you suggest that they start?
Well, I'll kind of use myself as an example. I hadn't been too long, arrived at Howard University as director. And well, I guess it was a month and a half, we were on spring break. I came to North Carolina and COVID blew up, meaning that I wasn't prepared to remain here. COVID, we were exiting campus, dedensifying. Not long after that, we had to find new ways of operating and reaching out to our students and our constituents. Then the racial injustice piece, and it just went on and on and on. Yeah. So I had to take some time, first of all, for me, find a space for me to breathe, to gather myself, to begin to be flexible. This isn't fair, it isn't right, but I had to adapt to, here are the circumstances, how am I going to deal with it, instead of playing into motion of how I would deal with it. And I had to accept that it would not be perfect. Yeah. And as my staff knows, that we struggled through getting our presence on social media started, but we got it done. Yeah. And I had to take care of me. And one of the things that I started was walking. And those of you who know me, I take about a 2 to 4 mile walk each day, depending on the weather. And that helps tremendously. I have to find space for myself. That's part of my flexibility, is self-care. And so that's one way, that's a way that I take care of my mental health.
So physical exercise, Dr. Barnes, is your way of tackling your mental health. So getting out there, walking, and putting in those 2 to 3 miles daily, or however often you go. So that's one way. What are some other ways we can tackle our mental health?
Well, of course, I want to say, as we're all, including this panelist, our psychologists, is the importance of therapy. Talking to someone to get an objective way of understanding how we think is also very important, to gain a sense of clarity. Sometimes we can get so much into our own minds that it becomes so used to the traditional way of thinking that we think that's the normal way of thinking. So sometimes it's very important for us to realize, hey, it may be a good idea for me to check in with someone else to see how I'm thinking and feeling, and try to work through reframing some of our thoughts and feelings that may not be so conducive or positive to our emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being. A few things to note. So if you're ever wondering how or when do I know I need to address my mental health, is I look at these, I call them your check engine signs, or these red flags. And typically they manifest in like depressive and anxiety symptoms. And I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But to be aware about what those signs and symptoms look like gives you an indication, hey, I need to check my engine light. My engine light is on.
Mm-hmm.
Depressive symptoms can look like, anxiety, bouts of sadness, irritability, withdrawal, isolation, feelings of guilt, lack of motivation, lack of energy. If you see those red flag signs, those are indicators that you might need to, talk to someone else and gain a different perspective about what you're feeling and kind of process what's going on. Dr. Barnes mentioned more current issues that are going on. Can you imagine what that's like, coupled with like issues that already pre-exist and how that builds up? And so that's what I think about when we're talking about how we can work on mental health, is by way of therapy.
Yes. Yes, I totally agree, Dr. Good. I think definitely getting an objective and a professional to be able to assist you in assessing what your needs are definitely one of the first steps in terms of going towards mental wellness. Any other thoughts about ways that we can be more mentally well, ways that we can do better? Yes.
I think that, similar to what Dr. Barnes was saying, something that's been especially helpful for me during these very stressful times is to be able to connect with people on my phone. So whether that's, I have like a bunch of different like family and friend group chats, whether I'm like watching verses on Instagram, finding these different ways to connect with people has been especially helpful for me. And I think can be especially important if you are quarantined solo, because I do think that can be a little bit of a different experience. And then also similar to what Dr. Good was saying, I think it's about being able to recognize the red flags and know when I need to put my phone down. Because sometimes the internet can be overwhelming. Social media can be overwhelming. We're constantly getting news on our feed about some of the civil unrest and social injustice that's going on, and that can be very overwhelming to the self. Mm-hmm. And then also too, social media and the internet can be a great way to connect, but it can also lead to a lot of comparison, right? Which is sometimes not helpful. So again, acknowledging that, yes, this is an adaptive way for me to keep connected, but also being able to acknowledge when my check engine light is on and I might need to put my phone down for a bit.
Yeah.
And let me add to that, I want to really push the self-assessment piece, because when you assess yourself, you'll find out and you'll quickly know that there are limitations. There are only so many things, and there's only so much that you can do as a human being. So beyond that, do not allow yourself to feel guilty about what you cannot do. Give yourself credit for putting in whatever effort, whatever you can do. And when you've done the best that you can, rest assured in that. A lot of times we have responsibilities. I have a responsibility for a staff, family, so forth and so on. And if we don't feel like we do it 100%, something is wrong with us. We begin to do negative self-thinking, and we have to let go of that. That's what I mean by the flexibility and the adaptability. Yeah. That self-assessment leading to your limitations, leading to there's only so much you can do, and that not allowing yourself to feel guilty about it, to accept that you've done the best that you can.
I think that's important to highlight. So what are some ways the negative self-talk can show up? What does it sound like, Dr. Barnes? what does negative self-talk sound like? If I hear it in my own head, what are some things I may hear that says, oh, Dr. Barnes talked about this, or Dr. Good talked about this, or Dr. Desselu talked about it? What would you say?
I should have done more. Why didn't I do more? My family really needs me. My niece really needs me. I can't be there. I'll give you an example that I struggled with for a minute. I have a great niece in South Dakota who's graduating. Her older brother, I was there for his graduation and cheering on. I can't be there for her. And I understand that she's not as happy as she would want to be. And we've spoken on the phone, and I just have to simply explain, this is the best I can do. I won't be flying out there because of the current pandemic. I'm in a vulnerable group, so I'm going to take care of myself, and I'm not going to fly out there. Yeah. But here's what I'll do, is that the plane fare that I was going to use to fly out there, I'll give to you. And that's the best that I can do. And so when you hear yourself saying, I should have done more, I should have found a way to be there, then I started beating myself up, and I had to let that go and understand that I have done the best that I could do under the circumstances. And I feel good about it now. I'm happy. I just put a picture up on the refrigerator, and I get joy every time I pass that. Rather than falling prey and doing nothing, I did something. So when you hear yourself beating yourself up, those are symptoms.
So let's look at depression. So depression, one of the symptoms of it, or signs of it, is feeling like you are a burden to someone else. Oftentimes that's the case too, and that's the negative thinking too. Sometimes it may be the experience or the perception that you are a burden to someone else. But in actuality, you may not be. And this ties into seeking help, because oftentimes we don't reach out to people because we feel like we're going to be a burden. That's one of the hallmark symptoms of depression, is feeling like you're going to be an extra burden or a hassle to someone else. And most times people are willing and ready to hear from you and want to understand what you're going through. So sometimes you may have this feeling like, oh, I don't want to reach out to someone because all I do is bring all my baggage to them, and that's not fair. When in actuality, that is probably negative thinking that's being perpetuated and keeping you in a confined place of feeling isolated, or even withdrawn. The difference being isolation meaning you're feeling disconnected from others, and withdrawal means you don't feel connected. Well, you withdraw from other people, you seclude yourself. Either way, it leads to feeling detached because of the sense of not feeling like you are worthy or you will be a burden or a hassle. That's sort of the negative thinking. Another piece of negative thinking is this, what they call a cognitive triad, where you feel like nothing good has happened in the past, nothing's going to change the situation I'm in right now, and there isn't going to be anything positive happening in the future. That's another red flag to let you know, hey, like my negative thinking may be a little too negative in my outlook. I may need to re-examine that.
And I think that's right. I think Dr. Barnes introduced this notion of guilt. And then Dr. Good was able to introduce another notion of burden and how that may show up in our lives and impact our mental health. I think another thing to be curious about, or one thing that Dr. Barnes said that stuck out for me, is really just being mindful of where we are, right? And so with COVID, there are a lot of limitations. There are a lot of things that we used to be able to do that we just can't, whether or not we're in the vulnerable population, but just in general, just because of the sheer impact of this global pandemic. And so you may find yourself, to Dr. Desselu's point, experiencing some isolation, right? Because you cannot connect with people that you're used to connecting with. You can't go out. Your state may still be under phases or stay-at-home orders. And so all of that is impacting our mental health. And so how do we take care of ourselves in this time of crisis? How do we take care of ourselves? So we reach out to people like Dr. Desselu showed. We connect. We may do, what did she say, verses, or connect with people on group chat. What are some other ways that we can keep connected even in crisis?
One thing that's always been very helpful for me is doing meditations. And I'm always talking about this app. If you know me, I'm always talking about this app that I love, which is called Insight Timer. This is my favorite meditation app. You know, I'm not connected to them in any way, so I don't get anything for talking about them, but I truly love this app. I mean, they have meditations on there for literally anything. They have meditation courses. They have different courses that you can do for like 10 days long. I really like the fact that I think that they do a pretty good job at highlighting, you know, facilitators of color, especially during this time, if you're looking for meditations on healing pertaining to racial trauma. So that is something that I've definitely been trying to include more into my daily regimen, because it is something that just keeps me grounded.
Insight Timer.
Yes.
Dr. Barnes?
And I was going to say something that you do, Dr. Kalechi, and that is, you know, spread like wildfire, deep breathing exercises. You have, until you try it, you have no idea how much solace you can get and relief you can get from taking in a deep breath, holding it, doing a count to maybe 5 or 7, and releasing it slowly. A big difference in the world. And if you practice doing that several times during the day, particularly when you find, as Dr. Desilu and Dr. Good have talked about, your red buttons, those check engine lights coming on, stopping to do that, what a world of difference that can make. And people often underestimate those little things. But when it comes to particularly people of color, heart disease, strokes, so forth, deep breathing will make a world of difference. That's one step in making a world of difference.
You'll be surprised how something that's seemingly so small is really actually big to breathe. We sometimes forget to breathe. What's happening is sometimes our heart rate and our breathing are not in sync. And sometimes you are having shallow breathing, and that's what increases your heart rate. That's what sometimes increases anxiety. So as we're talking about breathing, it's very much, as Dr. Barnes is mentioning, it's very important to realize how that even can impact your emotions, your judgment. So when you feel like you see someone who's posting something that's offensive as it relates to this racial tension and you want to respond, is to breathe in slowly, hold for a few seconds, and exhale slowly through your mouth as you're breathing out of a straw. Because it really helps calm your nerves so that you don't get so riled up into your anxiety. Because that's something that's very important to do when we sometimes lose sight of, when we let our emotions steer our responses in different ways. And that's another way of self-caring too, especially given this climate and everything that's going on.
Yes, I definitely agree with that in terms of the deep breathing. I agree with Dr. Good and Dr. Barnes in terms of the fact that when we are finding ourselves being anxious or stressed, we take very shallow breaths. You know, we just are, you know, and it shows up. And so I guess it made me think about, similar to what Dr. Desilu talked about with this app, with the Insight Timer, it made me think about what other ways does stress show up physically in our body, right? And I know for me, it may seem like butterflies in my stomach, or my heart may be racing. What other ways have you found that stress shows up so that people can start to connect mind to body? Like, oh, I may be stressed because this is happening for me. What would you all say?
Tenseness in the shoulders. If you're noticing it in your thighs, your legs, sometimes, again, like not breathing, you don't even realize when our muscles are tensed and clenched. It's also an indication of anxiety. That's why progressive muscle relaxation and deep breathing go hand in hand. And we'll be sure to provide information to help you with some techniques to tap into your body so that you can realize these are some red flags or check engine light signs. So that would be one thing: muscle tension, tightness.
Irritability, something we all know sometimes so well, that when we are stressed, we become irritable, those muscles tighten up, and the mouth loosens up. And so they sort of go hand in hand. And if we can recognize that, what we need to do is step away, sort of like a timeout. There is no shame in giving yourself a timeout. You need to detach yourself from the circumstance or the situation when you find yourself becoming irritable. Because unfortunately, our irritability will lead to more depressive and more digging a deeper hole, because we say things that we maybe don't really mean, we offend people, and that just starts a vicious cycle. So being able to pull back. Now, being able to pull back does not mean that you're weak. It does not mean that you don't have a point and you don't stand for a point. It simply means that you're taking a time out in order to present that point in a better way, in a way that the person opposite you or persons can receive it, and communication is facilitated.
Yeah.
There's a lot of research about the digestive system as a bodily function and how that's associated with stress and anxiety. So that's another physiological symptom that's associated with our mental health in terms of mind and body.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what Dr. Good said. The stomach is a big indicator of anxiety or any type of emotional overwhelmed. So if you're feeling like your stomach is in knots, or people sometimes feel nauseous, some people feel like they need to go to the bathroom. These are all actually very common indicators of anxiety or stress.
That gut feeling, right? That gut, it tells you a lot. It tells you a lot. Yeah. And even like sweaty palms is another way that physically stress manifests itself or anxiety manifests itself. So we talked about heart racing, we talked about irritability, we talked about tension. Dr. Good did a good job of like showing it, and you start to wonder, like, why am I walking around like this? Because you're tense.
You experience it, you know it firsthand.
Yes, you are tense. You are tense in your back, lower back pain, all of that are physical manifestations of it.
And sometimes the problem is you do experience it and you know it, and sometimes you don't know it. It just happens. And, I've had times where people will say, pat me on the back and say, oh, gee, you're tight here. And I was like, I didn't realize that. So that's a cue for me, feedback for me to breathe and relax. And I think it's most damaging when we don't know. When we don't know, we're unable to do something about it. When we do know and don't do something about it. So we have to learn again to take in those self-care measures. But it's just horrific when you don't know, because whatever it is continues to build and wear you down physically and emotionally.
One of my favorite sentiments around mental health and the importance of mental health is that you can't pour from an empty cup. So this notion that even as you give to people, even as you show up in people's lives, even as you support people, when we're constantly giving and not replenishing ourselves, that is very detrimental to our mental health. So when we think about ways that we can balance it out, ways that we can support, but also be supported, ways that we can allow people to help us, you will find that oftentimes, to Dr. Barnes' point, you may not know that something is happening for you, but similar to that pat that he got on his back, someone else may say, hey, you're a little irritable today. Hey, you're not being so nice. Hey, this is not like you. And so being able to have people around you that mean you well, where they can give you some insight that you may not know. I want to transition us to our next question. It says, traditionally, the subject of mental health has been a taboo topic in the African American community. Can you share how we can have healthy conversations with our families and friends on this topic? What do you all think? Taboo topic, how do we share? How do we talk about it? why has it been so difficult to talk about? Any thoughts?
Well, since I'm the oldest probably of the group, the vulnerable category, I'll start. Fortunately, I've lived long enough to see some transition in that. When I started out in this 40 years ago, it most certainly was a serious taboo for somebody to say, oh, he crazy, or she's crazy, or something like that. And you get ostracized and put in a corner, and nobody wants to deal with you. Nobody wants to talk to you. And I think that, you know, this is a part of a legacy of in slavery and being shunned for our differences and so forth. But understanding that if you feel it, somebody else feels it. And understanding that you're not alone in the world. And I think we've come to move in a direction to accept that more. And I think our institutions, such as the church, our civic groups, have come to talk to us and display that taking care of your mental health is not a bad thing. In fact, it's a good thing, because you have to take care of yourself before you can help anybody else. Otherwise, the whole boat goes down, becomes a sinking ship.
I think the ushering in of mental health in the Black community or people of color has been really beneficial by the church of incorporating that, because we had this dichotomous way of thinking that it's either you seek out church or religiosity or mental health. Not realizing that God wants us to use both. Like, we can use both. They both can coexist. And I'm thankful of that transition that Dr. Barnes was able to attest historically and see. I'm not going to say too historically go back, but to see the evolution of mental health in accessing services, although there are barriers to care, such as lack of resources or people being stigmatized based on prejudices or discrimination, incompetency based on their cultural competence. But there are a lot of trends and things that are really improving. We talked about how mental health is important, in as much as it's important as about physical health. We all have mental health. You got physical health and you have mental health. It's equally as important. When you go to the physician, you use your insurance to see a doctor. You have that same insurance to use for mental health. Some people don't even realize that they have insurance coverage to see a therapist. So we complain and talk about not wanting to use our car insurance, paying car insurance. We don't have any claims we're submitting. You have insurance too that you're paying each week, and you have the benefit to talk to a person who is trained to give you information, and you share your parts of yourself, which is a very vulnerable process, to be able to work through some things that you might not would have otherwise do or take the opportunity to do. I'm just glad to know that it's more accepted now than it has ever been before, although there are challenges to seeking mental health services in the Black community.
I think one thing that is helping with the stigma would be people like us. So I think the opportunity to see clinicians of color, I think, is helping to break the stigma, because before people thought like, well, I don't see people who look like me in this field, so perhaps this is something that is just not for me. And in terms of how to approach the conversation with family and friends, I think that with my group of friends who are maybe, I guess, younger generation, I think that there's a greater openness to having those types of conversations. And because they are more open, I definitely try to have the conversations and use some of my platforms to talk about mental health. When it comes to, say, older generations, I just try to, put it out there a little bit and see how people respond. I recall like talking to my mom the other day, and she was saying like her stomach was hurting. So I was like, are you anxious? Like just throwing it out there, like helping her make the connection, like maybe you're feeling stressed out or anxious, and maybe that's why your stomach is hurting. So I think that, you have to know your audience and know how you can approach the conversation with them.
Yeah. You don't, to help someone access mental health services or to tap in that may be some sort of emotional challenges that they're experiencing, you don't have to be an expert. You can like pick up and understand the cues and signs and symptoms of, like, let's say 2 major challenges like depression and anxiety.
Yeah.
You can notice those symptoms manifesting and just bring them. I noticed that, you know, you've been sleeping a lot lately. I've seen you a little bit on edge. Dr. Floyd mentioned this earlier, and that's normally not like you. Or I know you're working this project, but you seem to have withdrawn from it. And I was just wondering, like, is everything okay? Because I know this is typically not how you are. And kind of put into perspective, for example, what you've noticed about, like, you know them well enough, you know their goals, their objectives, and like, I know that this is something you've been working towards, and I see you're struggling in this area. I'm just concerned and wondering if there's anything I can do to help you, because sometimes it can feel very shameful for people to acknowledge that they are in a vulnerable place, not a weak place, a vulnerable place, which we all have been. And that is another way to help people access services, is to be empathically attuned, to connect. If you can be open and honest and say that you've once been there before, it bridges the gaps and makes you feel like, makes that person feel like they're not the only one, because they're not. And I think that's a way to help bridge the gap, to have these conversations about even addressing our mental health.
And when you talk about vulnerability, Dr. Good, just from a historical perspective, we have learned, talk about learned behavior, to dislike ourselves. That any human experience out of the norm, there's something bad about it. And I think each generation has progressively done better in helping us as African American and people of color to let go of that shell, from the civil rights movement to what we are doing currently, that no, we don't deserve to be mistreated. We haven't necessarily done something wrong. And that self-hatred, to dislike ourselves, we have to let go of that. And I think we're moving in that direction. We still have a ways to go, but we're moving in that direction. So I'm hopeful.
And when we talk about this notion of taboo, and I think Dr. Barnes introduced it as being one of our elders or a more seasoned person, I think about the term that you may hear in churches about generational curses, right? But in our field of psychology, we call it transgenerational trauma, right? And so the assumption is that trauma is passed unconsciously and consciously from one generation to the next, and that we feel the burden of our ancestors, right? And that may show up in our everyday lives. And so, to Dr. Barnes's point, and to Dr. Good's point, to Dr. Desalou's point, being able to know that self-care is not a luxury. It is something that is needed for everyday survival. And being able to know that all of it, mind, body, and soul, are interconnected. And so being able to feed each portions of your life so that you can be a better you. And so it really is important for us to know that we, to Dr. Barnes' story, we didn't do anything to deserve the treatment that we still get in the world. And so it's important for us to find ways to support ourselves and to take control of that. And to Dr. Desalou's point, seeing these Black people that look just like you that are in this field and connecting to the services of people is going to be really important. I want to highlight something Dr. Good said that I thought was really important. When you go to the doctor, I don't know, your wellness visit, or you go to the dentist or any clinic person that you go to, it's important to know when you go there, if you don't feel like you're comfortable in that space, what do? You take your insurance, you go somewhere else. It's the same way in the field of mental health. Go somewhere, find someone, and if you don't feel like they're meeting your needs, do your due diligence to get connected with services that do. You don't have to stay anywhere where you're not being served. And so really taking that attitude and that proactiveness of, there is a need that needs to be fed within me. How do I do that? So if I go to a dentist and he jacks my tooth up, I'm least likely to go back to that dentist. And so that's the same thing if I go to a mental health clinician and they just don't get me, whether they don't look like me or they don't understand my experience. doing the additional work to get with someone that does get me, that's able to get through to me and get that result that I need, right? So I think it's a really good place to talk about how can people connect to services. So they see us, they see we're in the field. And so how can they connect with services? What are some ways that you found for people of color or Black people to connect with services?
Right.
So let me just kind of pull up on that, because I'm in this historical mode today. We've been taught so much, so affirmatively, to care for someone else much more than we care for ourselves. We make great sacrifices, and I'm talking about historically. We've had to take care of somebody else's crops, whatever it was, for somebody else, even if we've been in the hot sun 15 hours a day. We've always been taught to care for someone else more than we care for ourselves. And it's not a curse, but it is what we call unconsciously passed down to us. And we work ourselves to death caring for someone else versus ourselves, and not realizing that we have to care for ourselves first and foremost as a foundation in order to be able to care for somebody else. We worry, bringing it into the day where you're talking about, Dr. Floyd, you know, I don't want to offend the dentist. I don't want to offend this doctor, you know, so I'll stay here and do it. He or she has an MD behind their name. When all the time that we're suffering in the guise of taking care of somebody else rather than getting up and moving elsewhere. And so what I encourage people to do, I do assessments and so forth. And when I do that, I tell people what I do, and I give them names of other people to check out also. I want you to be a good consumer. I want you to find out, interview the therapist or whoever it is. You have a right to do that and to find out what's comfortable. If a practitioner is offended because you are asking them questions that you will think will help you, then that's not the person for
I don't know about y'all, but that touched me.
It's important, though, to be mindful about seeking help, mental health, in a way that say, for example, if you are not happy with the therapist, don't be discouraged and deterred. We're already in the mindset of like sadness and downward thinking. Be mindful that it's kind of different if you're not satisfied with the physician. You know you have a broken foot, so you're going to go see someone. Let's not let the depression or the resistance to seeking help be a further deterrent. Try to be encouraged to seek out and find other ways to reach out to a therapist that meets your needs, that makes you feel comfortable. You do have choices. It is your authority to seek out someone to address your needs. Be encouraged.
I think that, similar to what Dr. Good was saying, I really look at, and I know that this is a question that we often get, like, how do I find the right therapist? Like, how do I find the therapist that's for me? And really, I compare it to finding a house that you're trying to buy or finding a partner. Like, it really depends, and it's going to differ from person to person. And I can't speak for everyone else, but I know I'm not about to buy a house that I don't think is a good fit for me, So like, I look at, finding a therapist in that same way. Like, do you want to commit the time, the energy, and the effort, because therapy can be difficult, and the finances sometimes, to being with a therapist that you don't think is a good fit? And in terms of how to find a therapist, I know that a lot of folks start with the online databases. Psychology Today is a very popular one. I know Therapy for Black Girls is also a very popular one as well. Another thing too is getting recommendations from people who you know in the field, or who you know have gone through the therapy process. You might have a friend who says like, yeah, like this person was a really good fit. I think they might be a good fit for you. It didn't work out because they didn't take my insurance or something like that. And then they can give you that person's contact information. And so I know a lot of people who have been successful in their search for a therapist via recommendations.
I think that's excellent. I think being able to say, hey, I've been through it and here are my thoughts about how you can go. She mentioned psychology today. She mentioned therapy for Black girls. And psychology today is unique because you can put in your zip code, your insurance, and then it pulls up people within your area. To Dr. Barnes' point, you can interview these people and find your best fit. There are a lot of Black organizations that you can connect with, even on social media. Black Mental Wellness is another group of people. But just find, say it again, sir.
Association of Black Psychologists.
Yes, ABSI is another organization. So really trying to find the best organization that will help you meet your needs.
It would be a good idea for us to like add these resources. We're going to get Ms. Johnson so that we can put down Psychology Today, ABSI, Association of Black Psychologists. They all have search engines, as Dr. Desilu said. You can even refine the search not only based on zip code, but ethnicity, gender, their way of providing therapy, their theoretical orientation, their specialties. So yeah, we'll provide that information too.
Yes, we definitely will work with DAR to get that information to you. Thank you, Dr. Good. Even as we start to wind down this conversation, it's much needed dialogue about mental health. And we've talked about ways that it shows up not only physically, but also in behaviors. We've talked about even how to cope with it, ways that we are keeping connected even in this COVID. I think it's important to really think about who it is that you want to be in terms of your mental wellness. So we all strive to be whole, right? Mind, body, and soul. We all strive to be whole. And that's a daily journey in doing our own work and getting support. Therapists or psychologists have therapists. That's just the reality of it. It is a cycle that just keeps on giving. And so we reach out to people too for our own mental wellness, because even as we pour into you, it's important that we get poured into also. So just in thinking about that, I guess Howard being an HBCU, I think it's important even as we end right now, because you may have or know some baby Bison or people that are continuing, that we talk about the work we do at the Howard University Counseling Service. So I want to turn that over to our director because we want to make sure that our future Bison are prepared and know that they have support on campus to support them. Dr. Barnes.
Absolutely. So we have a dedicated staff of about 14 or 15 practitioners who serve our student population from a wide range of emotional wellness as well as emotional disorders. We have been on campus typically 5 days a week, from very early in the morning to late at night, where our groups are up and running and so forth. We move virtually since spring break. We have an intake process where we have intake hours during the week, every day during the week, and we have walk-in hours so that you can just come in and see a therapist. Immediate, first come, first served basis, so to speak. We have a training program so that we further populate our doctoral candidates and professionals who are out there to serve the public. We have the only accredited counseling service HBCU center in the country through the American Psychological Association. So we're really proud of that. We do a lot of extracurricular activity. We work with the students. And I just must say that our Director of Outreach, Dr. Floyd, and with help from other staff, we have just blown up in terms of the social media world. So one of the things we like to do is sort of a preventive kind of stance. And this is through our outreach. Dr. Good, Dr. Desilu, and many others. We've done so many Instagram posts, social media tweets on YouTube, help me here, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter,
and then our website.
We have a podcast for Black males called Equilibrium. There's so much going on. It's just everywhere. And our thinking is that if we can reach out to students on these platforms and talk about first time being on campus, loneliness, being away from home, relationships, trust, all of these things that typically weigh on a student's mind that they don't talk about. When we see them, now they're in full-blown distress. If we can reach out there and have Zoom seminars and webinars and so forth to kind of address this, our students don't feel alone, and they don't have to wait until they're in a big catastrophic situation to run to us. So those are our services, and please, in the fall, even now, call us at 202-806-6870. I'm going to let Dr. Floyd give us our handles on our website pages. And you can make an appointment. You can make an appointment from 8 to 4 and at 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And at 4 p.m., we have a crisis line that stays on until 8 a.m. in the morning each day during the week for our students. So we try to give them full coverage and understand that we have that crisis line on the weekends, 24 hours a day, each day of the weekend as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Barnes. And so in order to reach us, or for the baby Bison or continuing Bison to reach us on social media, we are on Instagram, HU_counseling service. We're also on Twitter, HU Counseling. And then lastly, but not least, we're on YouTube, Howard University Counseling Service. We also have our main website under the Howard University Student Affairs Office of the Vice President of Student Affairs. And so that's available too. It's also important to know that even as we take care of our undergraduate and our baby Bison from undergrad, Dr. Desalu actually works on the law campus. And so if you know, the West Campus is now law and divinity. And so she supports them over there. Dr. Desalu, you want to talk a little bit about your work there at the law campus?
Yes, so I'm very excited to be over there. I really do enjoy working with the students of the West Campus. And so I service them not only for their individual therapy needs, but also any outreach needs that they have as well. I know that Hustle is having their orientation to welcome in the class of 2023. And so I'm also taking part in that process as well. And again, I really enjoy it. So primarily doing a lot of the individual therapy, but they also have a lot of, I guess you can say, psycholegal based outreaches that I typically take part of as well.
Thank you.
And I want to just say that when Dr. Floyd mentioned the baby Bison, it made me think of one other thing. We have a series that we started yesterday called Dreams Deferred, a Modified Freshman Experience. So one of the things that we want to do is take care of the health and safety of our Bison family. We have COVID going on. We've experienced things that we've never experienced before. And so we think that the best way to address this is in preparation. So we have a series led by Dr. Desalu and our folks who are here on Dreams Deferred. And what our aim, our purpose is to have our incoming students, as well as our current students though, to talk about what it would be like for them. What's their feeling? What's their gut reaction to not being able to be in Green Stadium to have homecoming, not having Yard Fest, not having some of the concerts that we're famous for. After all, you're coming to college and you want the college life experience. We've all done it. It's not going to be the same way. And we as behavioral professionals know that part of the way to get compliance with, you got to wear your mask, you know, you need to keep 6 feet away, you can't gather in groups, is to talk about it ahead of time. So we started a series called Dreams Deferred. It happens for an hour, and I'm going to let either Dr. Desalu or Dr. Floyd tell you when the other series, they happen on Thursdays. But for students to be able to get those feelings out and be able to know that other people feel the same way. And we want to increase the probability that they will be able to comply with the safety regulations that go on in the fall when we return to campus.
Dr. Desalu, you want to tell us when the next Dream Deferred will be?
Yes, so the next one is going to be on this coming Thursday at 6 p.m. And this is going to be for our upperclassmen, because in addition to our first time in college, this is also going to be a change and can be devastating for our current students as well. So we're going to be holding that space for them this coming Thursday. The Thursday after will be dedicated to our transfer students. And then the last Thursday of the month and the first Thursday of August will be dedicated to our first time in college students.
Thank you, Dr. Desalu. And Dr. Desalu is also a Bison alum. So thank you for that. Dr. Jonathan Good, I think, does a phenomenal job. So in addition to us doing the work when we were in brick and mortar, similar to what Dr. Barnes was saying, we do see students as clients all day. We do outreach, but Dr. Good, I think, does a phenomenal job in running this, one of the longest lasting men's groups. And I know that's going to look different in the virtual environment, but I think it's important to note that our Bison men have a space or to get the support they need. So Dr. Good, can you tell us a little bit about your men's group?
Right. So it's a long-term psychotherapy group, which is different from counseling group, where we provide services to address all the sort of issues we've been talking about, including depression, anxiety, issues around racial trauma, issues around masculinity, dealing with trauma in general, relationship issues, establishing, maintaining relationships. So there's a myriad of like issues that we discuss that's a safe space for our men. We do groups in general. There are different type of groups that we also offer. We have short-term groups and we have long-term psychotherapy groups. So, you know, if you think about it, not in a broad generalized way, but Black folk, we have a way of working very well in a collective way. A group process is a great way for us to connect and understand and validate and normalize our experiences and offer support. And that's a strength that we traditionally have held, and we hold it today. And we're one of the few institutions, college universities, that pride ourselves, HBCUs in particular, in running groups, and trained by some of the best African-American psychologists in the United States. So we take pride in that. And we also provide psychiatry services as well. So those are psychiatrists who prescribe medications to treat mental health conditions as well. So we offer a wide range of services, and I'm very appreciative of Dr. Floyd because she runs the outreach as director. And so given the climate, I know we're at a time bound, but given the climate that's going on, we take pride in the way that we're addressing this indefinite confinement of COVID-19, the high tensions of the racial climate right now, and dealing with the racial trauma, which is a topic within itself, and dealing with a myriad of other issues that we're all experiencing in an outreach, preventive way, and an interventive way. So that's some of the stuff that we do in addition.
And talking about men, Black men, let me just piggyback a quick second on our podcast called Equilibrium. Dr. Isom, Dr. Delon Isom, and Dr. Philip Graham run that. And a couple of their segments had to do with, quote, angry birds. And the last one was say their names. So, you know, Black men are on fire in this country, figuratively and literally, with the experiences. And even if you've not experienced it, you're experiencing it vicariously. So that podcast is very important. And I just want to thank all of our staff for reaching out and taking care of our Bison family.
Thank you so much. And I really just want to take the time, even as we end, to thank the Howard University Development and Alumni Relations Office. Thank Ms. Johnson. Thanks all the support that we got today. I think the importance of them seeing about, I think it's really important that they notice the importance of having this mental health discussion my hope is that it will be a continual discussion, not only at Howard, but in our community, because it's much needed. I want to thank my panelists again, or our panelists again, Dr. Jessica Desalu, Dr. Michael Barnes, Dr. Jonathan Good. I'm Dr. Kalechi Floyd. I'm the Director of Outreach at the Howard University Counseling Service. And with that, we say thank you and have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.
God bless.
Bye,
Take care.
everyone.
Bye-bye.